high-tech sex? It sounds like a contradiction in terms. Isn't sex one thing that doesn't require any technology? It's a biological function, a drive for which people are pretty much fully equipped at birth. And yet, the human impulse to take a good thing and make it incredible has driven people since ancient times to contrive and devise potions, gadgets, devices, and toys for l'amour. Every technological advance from ceramics to silent films to CD-ROMs and DVDs has immediately been coupled with sex.
It never ceases to amaze me the speed with which humans deploy their technology for sexual purposes. There's got to be some unit of measurement. It's like speed of light, speed of sound, time it takes to get technology to a sexual expression.
Sex has never been totally natural. People have always been trying to insert some kind of mechanical device in it. They've been trying to toy with it. They've been trying to make it better.
I mean, with this huge brain, we have created a high-tech world out of a very primitive, basic drive.
That drive is on the verge of morphing into some mind-boggling new forms, like holographic sex, in which a programmable 3D image floats to life before your eyes, or virtual sex, not just emails and chat rooms, but sophisticated computer add-ons that make it possible to literally turn someone on across the internet. As scientists isolate the chemistry of sex, the specific proteins that control desire and function, we really do stand on the edge of a new reality.
Within a couple decades, when you look onto the internet or look into the personals of a newspaper, a person might say, my name is Betty, I have high levels of MAO, low levels of serotonin, high testosterone, high dopamine, and if you are a biological match, call me.
The call for psychosexual drugs stretches far into the past. Aphrodisiacs have captured the imagination and the investigative energies of nearly every culture since ancient times. The range of reputed aphrodisiacs is fascinating. Everything from onions to ginger, mandrake root to rhinoceros horn, swan genitals to Spanish fly. Most aphrodisiacs draw their mystique from one of four somewhat demystifying reasons. They look like sex organs, they're spicy and hot, they're extremely rare, or they are the sex organs of animals, especially animals known for their sexual energy. Which is not to say that aphrodisiacs don't sometimes have at least a partial basis in scientific truth. Like oysters.
They're so rich in iodine and zinc from the sea that they restore the body and bring vitality. And also, they're very similar to certain body parts.
Spanish fly, of course, is the bad boy of aphrodisiacs. Made from the crushed skin of a blister beetle prevalent in southern Europe, Spanish fly has been used as a sexual stimulant for at least 2,000 years. According to the Food and Drug Administration, Spanish fly has no special powers of arousal, but is dangerous and potentially lethal.
It irritates the urinary system so that any kind of rubbing or itching definitely satisfies or tries to satisfy the itch. But the problem is it causes urinary damage.
Ginseng, one of the most revered and mysterious plants on Earth, has long been hailed as a sexual tonic. In tests relating to sexuality, ginseng has been shown to increase sperm production and mobility. It has also quickened the development of sexual organs in mice. The plant is highly valued by those who believe in its tonic powers. Most ginseng sells for between $100 and $500 a pound. This 40-year-old root is priced at $16,000. But that's nothing. In 2001, the owner of this herb store in Los Angeles sold a single ginseng root for $180,000.
Most of the most expensive roots come originally from the Qingbai Mountains in China. And the root that are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, number one is it's based on how it looks, like a man. It's really thin, it's got the full growth root, it's got the long legs. Also another thing is, how old is it?
The older a root, the more active ingredients or ginsenosides it has. Ginseng isn't the only prized aphrodisiac in Chinese medicine. Far from it.
What we have here is deer antler. People say these are aphrodisiacs just because they increase the red blood cells in the system and testosterone levels. Other Chinese herbs that we use to tonify the yang for sexual performance is a gecko, which is basically a lizard from China. Very good for the kidneys. We also have an assortment of seahorses. Good for impotence and good for tonifying the yang.
Western medicine may not know much about tonifying the yang, but it has come up with a stunningly effective potency pill of its own. Viagra, introduced in March 1998, currently generates over $1.5 billion a year in sales. An estimated 52% of all men between 40 and 70 years old have experienced some kind of erectile dysfunction, a condition which for millennia has been suffered in helpless silence. Before Viagra, an erection injection was the main remedy for ED.
These are injections directly into the penis of substances which make the vessels of the penis grow larger and the penis erect. And not surprisingly, men were not desperately keen to inject needles into their penis.
Sildenafil, the active ingredient in Viagra, was developed by Pfizer Pharmaceuticals in 1989 as a heart drug for people with angina. It didn't perform well in tests, but male volunteers did report a curious side effect.
They were getting erections very easily. For example, just a pretty nurse passing was sufficient to give them an erection.
Pfizer quickly shifted the focus of its tests. Using a device called a Rigiscan, it measured the erections of thousands of men under the influence of the new drug. 80% reported improved erections. Pfizer was ecstatic. So were the volunteers.
We are required by the regulations to account for every last tablet. Towards the end of the study, we found that patients were reluctant to give their tablets back. So they tended to be more active towards the end of a study than they were at the start of the study. And this is probably because they knew that the tablets were running out and they'd have to give them back.
Sildenafil works by increasing blood flow to the penis. It does this by boosting the impact of nitric oxide, a substance which is released by nerves in the penis following sexual stimulation, and which causes its vessels to dilate, making an erection possible. One of the volunteers in the Viagra tests happened to be Senator and 1996 presidential candidate Bob Dole.
You know, it's a little embarrassing to talk about ED, but it's so important to millions of men and their partners that I decided to talk about it publicly.
People identified with him straight away, and if it was okay for Bob Dole to talk about erectile dysfunction, then it was okay for anybody else to talk about erectile dysfunction.
Thinking about trying Viagra?
We wanted somebody also to open the door for the younger man.
So get in the driver's seat.
Get to your doctor for a checkup and find out if a free sample of Viagra is right for you.
And what Mark Martin does is he puts sexual dysfunction in context of overall health with the Tune Up for Life campaign.
Despite its phenomenal success, Pfizer estimates that only 20% of those who could benefit from Viagra are taking the drug. Which is one reason why pharmaceutical firms are feverishly working on alternatives, like this gel form of sildenafil, which works directly on the penis, and this fast-acting inhalant, which sends irreversible messages of arousal to the brain and triggers an erection within 15 minutes. Incredibly, new treatments for ED are in the offing that will eventually make Viagra and its spin-offs seem passé. Gene therapy will probably be available within 10 years. When doctors isolate the specific genes that control erection, they'll be able to introduce those genes through a benign virus and rebuild a man's erectile system from the inside out.
Gene therapy means the application of segments of genes, or which are segments of chromosomes, into a diseased organ to replace the abnormal genes and correct the abnormality and return that organ to normal function.
An even more staggering high-tech treatment for ED is tissue engineering. Men or women with genitals that don't work and don't respond to any other treatment will literally be able to grow a new penis or vagina.
It's no longer science fiction. We are able to take small pieces of tissue, grow them out in the laboratory, and create organs.
Dr. Anthony Atala of Harvard Medical School has helped pioneer the process. Over the last 10 years, he has successfully grown new penises and vaginas for small animals, as well as bladders, windpipes, and other organs. Though it sounds a little like something out of Frankenstein, the process of tissue engineering is disarmingly straightforward and low-key. Atala and his team biopsy a small piece of healthy tissue from the damaged organ, then grow the tissue in this red culture, or soup. When the cells have multiplied, they are basted onto and injected into a scaffold, or mold, which is made out of biodegradable materials and carefully shaped into the form of the desired organ, in this case, a small vagina. The seeding process, as it is called, goes on for 7 days.
These scaffolds degrade as the tissue is forming. And by the time that the scaffold is fully degraded, the tissue is now fully formed.
This radical treatment won't replace Viagra, but it will be a godsend for those born with non-functioning organs, or organs that have been damaged through violence, or even for men with severe cases of ED, where the penile tissue is thoroughly scarred.
Someday, patients who have sexual dysfunction will be able to go to their doctors and say, you know, we've tried everything and the problem is on the organ itself, and hopefully we will be able to put a new tissue or organ back into that patient so that they are able to have fulfilling lives.
Dr. Atala expects tissue engineering for sexual organs to be available by 2010. Reviving men sexually is one thing, helping them enjoy sex responsibly is another. Up next, the condom revolution and the male pill. In 1998, the year that Viagra was first available, the Pentagon spent $50 million on the drug for troops and veterans. High-tech sex will return on Modern Marvels. While women have over a dozen options, when it comes to contraception for men, the condom is still king. The condom. Could anything be more homely and low-tech? And yet, for all its simplicity, the condom has morphed into countless variations and evolved dramatically in recent years.
We've seen new shapes, new materials, emphasis on pleasure, not just protection. We've seen polyurethanes, latex thinner than we could ever imagine. We've eliminated nasty smells and added strawberry aromas. We've come a long way in the condom industry.
The technology behind condom production has also come a long way. 700 million condoms are produced in the U.S. each year, mostly by dipping glass molds into latex. The dry condoms are rolled off the molds, washed, dried again, and then put through a series of stress tests to make sure they meet FDA standards.
The stakes here are not small. This is a $1 device that's made for pennies that we are depending on to save our lives and prevent unwanted pregnancies.
The AIDS crisis of the 1980s brought a sense of both urgency and creativity to condoms, which today come in many sizes and flavors. Some condoms are as thin as cellophane and virtually invisible. Some are lubricated with a desensitizing agent to help men who suffer from premature ejaculation. But the big commercial breakthrough in state-of-the-art condoms has to do with pleasure.
These are our pleasure-producing condoms. This is the Pleasure Plus and this is the Inspiral. And you can see these crazy pouches and spirals are located exactly where most of the nerve endings are located.
Anatomically designed to improve rather than get in the way of sex, pleasure condoms quickly became the fastest-growing segment of the condom business and changed the way men thought about protection.
So the first time, it wasn't just buckle your seatbelt. It was now buckle your seatbelt and we're going to take you on a great ride. It was buckle that seatbelt because you're getting on a roller coaster. And that was a new idea.
This may be the golden age of condoms, but the idea of sheathing the penis has been around for a very long time. The Egyptians made the first such sheaths, from papyrus soaked in water. The ancient Chinese used oiled silk paper. Europeans in the 17th century made condoms out of fish bladders and animal gut.
There were some pretty chunky condoms that had seams, and these were seams that protruded and that hurt men and women during high friction sex. And then there were finer, more expensive models called gold beater skins, in which intestinal matter was worked through chemicals and through just kind of hand beating into a very fine, supple mass.
The vulcanization of rubber in 1844 had a revolutionary impact on condoms, turning them into rubbers that could be mass-produced for pennies. No less a figure than George Bernard Shaw hailed the rubber condom and the sexual liberation it promised as the single best thing to come out of the Industrial Revolution. Despite their widespread use, the U.S. government regarded condoms moralistically. The Comstock Law of 1873 made all forms of birth control illegal, and American soldiers were the only soldiers who didn't find condoms in their field kits during World War I. Not surprisingly, Americans came home with more cases of syphilis and gonorrhea than other troops.
When a man came back from a leave, he was asked whether he had sex. If he admitted to having sex, he was forced to go through a very nasty medical exam where his penis was smeared with a chemical ointment and his urethra was injected with a chemical substance, both of which were designed to protect them from contracting this disease even after the fact of having sex. This was painful, it was degrading, it didn't work.
The military did an about-face in World War II, not only distributing condoms, but aggressively encouraging soldiers to use them.
Well, there's only one sure preventative, and that's to keep your 13 buttons buttoned. The next best preventative is a rubber.
Hell, a rubber's like taking a shower with a raincoat on.
A rubber is the most effective single pro there is, if put on soon enough.
Condoms were finally established as an acceptable method of disease prevention. The only problem was decades of underground production had made them incredibly unreliable. Nearly 60% of all condoms proved defective in tests conducted before the war. The FDA stepped in and began regulating condoms in 1937. Today, condoms are virtually foolproof, if properly used. The future of condoms, meanwhile, could be intriguingly high-tech.
Perhaps they'll emit sound waves, or they'll reverberate in different frequencies, or they will tap into our own neuroanatomy and push buttons that we could only dream about.
On the other hand, condoms could become antiquated as a form of birth control, as high-tech sex marches forward with a pill that women have been dreaming of, the male pill.
Most likely that's going to be first a hormonal type of treatment, very much like the female birth control pill. And it will suppress the sperm production and will end up with men who have actually no sperm in their ejaculate. And that's coming. We're pretty close to that at the present time.
One reason why we still don't have a male pill some 40 years after developing one for women is physiological.
In a woman, you have only one egg, and you have to block the release of that one egg. In men, however, there are so many sperm, maybe 100 million sperm, and you need to reduce that sperm number to almost nothing. That's a big task, not easy.
Like the female pill, the male pill will meet that task by way of hormones that fool the body, in this case into thinking it's already produced sperm.
Then when we give the male hormone, the brain and pituitary thinks that the testis is making all this, and it says, okay, enough production in the factory, we're going to turn the system off.
A man's sex drive won't be diminished, and he will still ejaculate during sex. But the seminal fluid will contain only a fraction of the normal sperm count. Instead of reducing or aborting sperm, some researchers are working on ways to paralyze it. Scientists have identified the single protein that controls the whiplash motor in the tail of sperm. And a male pill or patch or implant that inhibits motility is likely to follow. If men are just catching up to women in the area of high-tech contraception, It's women who are playing catch-up when it comes to performance-enhancing pills. Up next, the physiology and pharmacology of female arousal. Vasectomy, or irreversible sterilization, has been the chosen form of contraception for 4 million American men and 50 million men worldwide. High-tech sex will return on Modern Marvels. Viagra has done a lot to get men suffering from erectile dysfunction revved up again. But sex, ideally, isn't a solo sport. What about women? According to a 1999 study, 43% of all women suffer from some form of female sexual dysfunction, or FSD. So far, high-tech sex has done little for them. FSD wasn't even recognized as an ailment by the American Medical Association until 1998. And the mechanics of sexual arousal, it turns out, are much more complicated for women than for men.
Men will function sexually as a brain prep. I mean, you can cut off this part of the male from the belly button up, and their sexual function will be okay. They'll be just fine. Women need input from the central nervous system. You hear women talk about this all the time. I have to find a place, a space. It just doesn't happen as a mechanical or a plumbing issue.
For a man, ED means having a hard time having an erection. But a woman with FSD can be having a problem in 4 distinct areas: lubrication, desire, orgasm, and pain during intercourse. Viagra actually helps women with lubrication issues, since it stimulates blood flow to the genitals. Unfortunately, that's only about 20% of the FSD population. Desire, or the lack of it, is currently getting most of the research attention for FSD. Ironically, testosterone, the male sex hormone, seems to hold the key to the female sex drive.
Women's sexuality requires a combination and a balance of both female hormones, estrogen, and male hormones, testosterone. And in the past, it didn't make sense to think that testosterone, the male hormone, would be important for female sexuality, but in fact it is.
Testosterone is the hormone of desire. That's what triggers the mechanism in the brain to crave sexual gratification.
Testosterone is secreted in tiny amounts in the ovaries and adrenal glands. When those secretions decline, usually with age, so does a woman's libido. Testosterone patches like the Intrinsa from Procter & Gamble could make all the difference for women who have a hard time getting in the mood. While high-tech science has just begun to look at sexual fulfillment for women, sex tech has been evolving for thousands of years in the area of female contraception. The Ebers Papyrus, written in Egypt in 1525 BC, provides the earliest recorded formula for contraception: a mixture of crocodile dung, honey, and sodium carbonate that actually did reduce the motility or thrusting capability of sperm. Aristotle wrote of olive oil as a spermicide, and tests in the 20th century proved it to be remarkably effective. Jews, meanwhile, invented the vaginal sponge in the 3rd century AD, which absorbed semen and so prevented pregnancy. The sponge is still widely used. The Industrial Revolution triggered an explosion of new contraceptive designs, including innumerable painful-looking intrauterine devices, or IUDs, which were inserted into the uterus to block the movement of eggs and sperm.
I encountered one patent which contained a barbed wire that actually penetrated the uterus and kept the IUD permanently attached to the uterus. If you do a search among patents in the United States for intrauterine devices, even today, you have to cross-list that search with birth control as well as fish hooks, which tells you something about the technological design.
The flow of contraceptive patents slowed down after 1873, when Congress passed the Comstock Law, defining all contraception as illegal and obscene. For most of the next century, birth control went underground. Opportunists were quick to fill the breach, never more so than in the case of Lysol, which was a leading form of female birth control in America during the Depression.
It's really a tragic chapter in the history of contraceptive technology because, of course, it didn't work to prevent pregnancy. But what the manufacturer of the Lysol douche did is preyed upon women's concerns during this time of economic hardship to buy a product that they could use for multiple things. They could use it to clean out their vaginas, they could use it to clean the kitchen sink, they could use it to scrub toilets, they could use it on their kids to gargle. Of course, women got pregnant anyway, but also in some cases, women determined to beat the pregnancy odds would douche multiple times. They would douche much more frequently than the Lysol bottle even recommended. And so their cervixes got scalded, their vaginas got burned. In a few cases, women died.
The great leap forward in birth control, of course, was the pill, introduced in 1960. The pill was developed in a quasi-covert manner by Dr. Gregory Pincus and a team of researchers in Boston in the early and mid-1950s. Birth control was still a controversial subject in the U.S., and for years Pincus's research was buried in annual reports, cryptically described as work with steroids to help control painful menstruation.
There was a lot of people in society that thought that this was a terrible thing to do. And I'm sure that there were times when the people who were trying to get this accomplished must have felt both frustrated and perhaps even on occasion concerned for their own welfare.
Testing on the pill began in 1956 in an overcrowded suburb of San Juan, Puerto Rico, where local authorities and residents were eager to participate in a serious study on birth control. Of the 220 women who took the pill in the first 8 months, not one became pregnant. The concept behind the pill is simple enough: to mimic the hormonal condition of pregnancy, during which the body naturally blocks ovulation.
For many years, the natural hormone progesterone has been known to produce endometrial changes in the uterus, and ovulation is inhibited.
Introduced by Searle Pharmaceuticals in 1960, Enovid, as it was called, was an overnight phenomenon, sparking profound social, cultural, and sexual changes. Within a year, 408,000 women were on the pill. By 1963, the number had jumped to 2.3 million. Today, it is the preferred form of contraception for over 10 million women in the U.S.
Women often said that they took this drug largely because it was the first time that they felt they could enjoy sex. It just freed them from this tremendous burden that had plagued women throughout sexual history.
Surprisingly, the #1 form of birth control in the United States today is not the pill. It's irreversible sterilization. More than 11 million women in the U.S. between 15 and 44 years of age have been sterilized. That's because sterilization is the only form of birth control covered by most insurance plans. That may change with the latest generation of birth control options, like Depo-Provera, in which 4 injections a year do the work of the pill. Or Mirena, an IUD that releases hormones directly into the uterus and prevents conception for 5 years.
It's as effective as sterilization, and yet it gives women the freedom to change their minds if they decide they want to go ahead and have a kid. It can just be removed, and a woman's fertility will return almost immediately.
While much has been done to make sex more responsible, a lot of technology has also gone into making sex more fun. Up next, sex toys at 9,000 revolutions per minute. Although the majority of health plans in the U.S. won't cover reversible contraception for women, most will pay $10 per pill for Viagra. High-tech sex will return on Modern Marvels. Sex may be all about doing what comes naturally, but that hasn't stopped a whole lot of people from trying to come up with an interesting new way to tweak the process. The history of eroticism is studded with such tools and techniques. Men in ancient China sewed tiny bells into their scrotum to intensify orgasm. Women in the Far East used egg-shaped balls and other sleek inserts for discreet stimulation. The island of Lesbos was famous in the 5th century BC for its production of dildos, which were used throughout the Mediterranean in religious and private practice.
I'm not interested that the human animal has developed sex toys. What's remarkable is that we don't use more of them. The human animal is enormously excited by novelty. It drives up levels of dopamine in the brain, and you feel good and excited and challenged in novel situations.
Sexual devices were never more prevalent, or novel, interestingly enough, than during the sexually repressed Victorian era. Between 1846 and 1900, the U.S. Patent Office granted more than 200 patents for inventions of a sexual nature. More often than not, the inventions were aimed at restraining rather than facilitating sex.
The idea was to stop sexual activity, to control sexual activity with machinery. In effect, they were waging a technological jihad against wet dreams and masturbation.
A major impetus for many of the patents was the belief that a man had only a limited amount of semen, and that by squandering it, he was wasting his life force. Semen loss was associated with everything from laziness to insanity, and inventors by the score set about trying to inhibit the treacherous sex drive.
The patents indicate that if you were a slackard on your job, there was a possibility that your boss would suspect you of inappropriate semen loss that was affecting your energy level, and inventors began to sheathe the penis in mechanical gear. Some of them had sharpened points. They were called pricks.
One patent depicted a water cooling system, a kind of anti-sex radiator that would run ice-cold fluid around the penis in the event of an erection. Another design used clips that would pull on a man's pubic hair if and when the penis began to rise. This system set off an alarm clock. And this one triggered an opera solo on a gramophone. The war against wet dreams was especially vigilant and brutal on behalf of the innocent, those who couldn't control themselves, namely children and the insane.
Some of the cruelest, some of the most blood-chilling patents that were filed were aimed at the inmates in American insane asylums in the 1800s. They involve iron, chains, metal screening, locks. They lived in these things for years, and when you read the patents of the well-meaning, quiet Victorian professionals, it's chilling because you realize this is just one of those times in history when it's something like the witchcraft trials.
Late 20th century patents provide no less fascinating a reflection of the sexual obsessions and preoccupations of more recent times.
After the AIDS epidemic became apparent, there was a great deal of effort put in to find ways to make body-sheathing rubber clothing using space-age technology that would allow two human beings to interact sexually and yet not touch their skin, even though they might be penetrating each other.
Another major issue that received a lot of media attention in the 1980s was rape. Again, a slew of inventors tried to tackle the problem.
The idea is to craft a weapon that can be fitted in the vagina that will lacerate, puncture, burn, rip unauthorized penises that enter that space. One of them is a sheath, not unlike a large tampon, except it has a stainless steel harpoon in it, that is a barbed harpoon. Another one has razor blades in it. It's like a cheese slicer. The penis runs itself through a razor blade grate. The most diabolical, it looks like it's out of a James Bond movie, and has a hypodermic needle. The needle stabs 2 inches deep into the penis and injects instantly a nerve agent that knocks the person out. Blip. What does it say about America that numerous inventors in the 1980s really believe that tens of millions of American women every morning when they put on their lipstick and they do their hair will also insert a penis-slashing weapon in their vagina, and that will be the way that they choose to live.
If sexual patents have frequently focused on repressing and even punishing the sex drive, A great deal of creativity has also gone into coming up with mechanical ways to make sex better. The sex toy of sex toys, of course, is the vibrator. According to a 1999 study, 2% of all women in America, about 1.5 million women overall, have one.
This is the smallest yet, and really a wildly popular style. Just fits on the tip of a finger, runs with a watch battery, has a little buzzy vibe to it, and makes any kind of sexual play possible to include vibration in.
It is widely assumed that vibrators came in with the 60s. They did. The 1860s. Vibrators were created to help physicians treat women suffering from hysteria, a catch-all nervous ailment that was epidemic throughout the century. The standard treatment for hysteria was digital manipulation of the clitoris to orgasm. Only it wasn't called orgasm. It was called hysterical paroxysm. And the man doing the manipulating wasn't the husband or lover, but the doctor. Hydraulic and battery-powered vibrators saved doctors a lot of time.
The doctors would use this vibrator as a labor-saving device because it took so long to induce these paroxysms with their hand. They didn't sexualize this experience. They thought of it as a health benefit. And so there was this strange dissociation between a sexual experience, as we would now recognize and label it, and a health experience that didn't acknowledge sexuality.
By the turn of the century, electric vibrators were getting smaller and moving out of the doctor's office. They were marketed to women as a home appliance with a host of pleasing applications.
Vibrators could be ordered through the catalogs of the day, the mail order catalog, Sears, Monkey Wards, all of those. Traveling salesmen carried vibrators from place to place. What was being focused on was sort of a two-pronged, they're good for you, and yet they'll also make you feel much perkier than you do today. And that was really where the cryptic orgasm language comes in. Feel flushed with new health and vigor.
Vibrators today are anything but cryptic, although it is hard to figure out just exactly what goes where in some of these multi-pronged toys. Computer chips and microtechnology have also come to the vibrator world, producing vibrators for the finger and tongue. Not to mention the vibrating panty, which is operated by remote control. If the vibe of these toys doesn't turn you on, how about a perfectly lifelike 3D partner that moves? Up next, holograms and sex across the World Wide Web. Vibrating for pleasure was so popular in the 1920s that a book detailing how women should ride a train so as to make the most of the vibrations went through 27 editions. High-tech sex will return on Modern Marvels. Imagine putting on a special bodysuit, sitting down at a computer, and having sex with someone across the internet. Not fantasy sex, but sex that can be felt on the skin.
The sensors are inside the suit, 36 of them. The person on the other side of the computer controls where the feelings go, and like I said, it's tickle, a buzzing, there's heat. There's sort of like a fingertip feather. You don't know where it's going to go. So when it does hit you and they're moving around, it's just really, it's fun. It's sexy.
The Cybersuit was unveiled in 2000 by Vivid Entertainment, an adult film studio that has, along with the rest of the porn industry, pushed up the temperature of sex web technology. The suit has yet to hit the market. International voltage variations and the possibility of someone with a pacemaker getting zapped have put it on the back burner for now. But Vivid is ironing out the kinks and improving the overall design.
The next generation suit is exactly the same as the suit worn by astronauts on current missions, in that the whole suit is inlaid with wires. As opposed to having 36 sensors, there's now something like 450 different sensors. So you can imagine that simply by moving the mouse for the computer along the table, it'd have the same effect as a young lady moving the nails all the way down your arms.
There you have it. The primitive first incarnation of what could become the high-tech sex of the not-too-distant future. Virtual sex that delivers all the physical sensations of the real thing. Sort of.
Some people are never going to step outside again. But a normal person will only get so much out of that for so long before they feel like they're missing something, like a human being.
The CyberSex Toolkit is already on display on websites like this, which offer variations on the vivid bodysuit that can transmit sensations direct to the genitals. Not just via an internet partner, but in perfect sync with a XXX DVD of, say, a porn star engaged in a sexual act. What you see, developers say, is what you feel.
That's mind-boggling. But then I guess if you'd lived in 1100 AD and told them about strip clubs, their heads would explode too. Humans find extraordinary ways to express themselves sexually.
Extreme cybersex may still be a few years removed from the mainstream. But internet sex, not just looking at porn, but using chat rooms and webcams to have cyber affairs, enjoy mutual arousal, make virtual love, is already a stunningly popular phenomenon. According to recent surveys, 21 million Americans have cruised the web for sex.
I'm not in the slightest bit surprised. I mean, this is a very primitive, basic human emotion, the sex drive. And if they have a nice, safe avenue to pursue a basic drive that can be quite an addiction, they're going to use it.
Web sex sounds like a new form of safe sex. But roughly 2 million Americans are addicted to sex on the web. And the addiction can be consuming.
It's so arousing, it's so compelling, it's like crack to cocaine addicts.
They become literally hooked on the arousal and the intensity of all of the stimulus and possibility that internet sex and cybersex offers.
At least one website offers a support group for cyber widows, people who have lost their partners to the crazy turn-on and hyperstimulation of sex on the web. For the record, the Vatican has weighed in on the question of cyber affairs. And yes, it is adultery, at least according to the Catholic Church. But the future of high-tech sex is going to be more radical and surreal than cyber strippers and mutual arousal. Just ask the hawkers at the Adult Entertainment Expo in Las Vegas, especially those promoting the latest in hologram technology.
It's a 3D, and the girl is basically sitting in your lap, and coming soon is a technology that's even going to alert your senses, and you're going to be able to feel that girl, and that's what we're working on next.
Holograms have been around since the 1980s, but what used to be an exclusive and costly technology has become affordable for home use.
This past year has really been a breakthrough for us because we've had really a culmination coming together of technology, hardware, software, content, and really a mindset of commercializing technology that was really used in the military aerospace environments.
So where will it all end, high-tech sex? Some say that brain implants will be the ultimate sex toy. Inhalable micro-DVDs that can deliver fantasies straight to the cerebellum. Others expect designer drugs, refined to the point of individual sexual psychology and desire, to take the age-old quest for the perfect aphrodisiac to new heights. But however the brave new world of sexuality evolves, it's consoling to believe that technology itself will ultimately come up short, prove impotent, somewhere in the Netherland between performance and love.